Strength isn't physical. Strength is in the mind. It is the ability to push through discomfort and how much you're not willing to give up on yourself despite wanting to. My name is Shannon, and unfortunately, Amanda can't be with us today, but we both welcome you to a world of bookish adventures. Today, I am so excited to share that we have indie author Nathan Ogloff with us. Nathan is the author of The Sapien Empire, which is in the apocalyptic sci-fi genre. The Sapien Empire was released on February 6, 2024, and currently, and this is really awesome, Nathan, currently has a Goodreads average of 4.69. So, woo, congratulations on that.
Thank you, Shannon.
And welcome to the podcast. We're so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here.
Absolutely. So why don't we start right in, Nathan, and why don't you tell our listeners all about the Sapien Empire?
Well, the Sapien Empire is going to be an 8-book post-apocalyptic epic where civilization is being rebuilt across the planet. And I have the first one out right now, with the second one scheduled to come out in November.
So those listeners listening to you now, they can catch your first book and they're not going to have to wait too long for the second. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I've actually started planning out the third and fourth books also. So yeah, I've got stuff down the pipeline for sure.
And like I said, I was kind of browsing. I haven't read The Sapien Empire, but it's now on my list. But I was browsing through some of the Goodreads comments. And one of the things I'm kind of seeing is people are loving your characters. They're loving the character development, your plot twist, your world building. Even a couple of them mentioned just the dialogue in and of itself. So it seems like you've put a lot of effort in this. So where did the inspiration for this world, these characters come from?
So the idea for this novel is the synthesis of two ideas. So it's one idea is me realizing what post-apocalyptic is. So I kind of tend to sometimes just zoom out and look at the larger picture of things. So if you look at the ebb and flow of human history, civilizations have come and gone, they've risen and collapsed. And so from the perspective of people going through a collapse, that's kind of like their post-apocalyptic. So if you think the Dark Ages, the Bronze Age collapse, the Mayan collapse, people that live afterwards, that's their post-apocalyptic era. And so you'll always see that if you were to just live in that era and just have a very myopic view of time and think like, well, this is just the end of the world, this is the end of times, it's easy to think that's just the end of the story. Now that we in the modern 21st century have the scope of history, we realize something always comes back. And so I said, well, why don't I do post-apocalyptic, but I deal with what's coming back after society's collapsed. And so that was the first idea. The second idea was just a lot of my disappointment with the UN and its sort of lack of ability to make people resolve things peacefully, and how there are tragedies that happen across the planet, and unfortunately they happen, and they're sort of allowed to in a sense. And so in a moment I think of just naive sheer want, I said I would really like it if there was just some entity that was going across the planet and just fixing all these problems and delivering justice to places where it doesn't really have it, and just taking action to their own hands, regardless of what other larger governmental organizations are doing. And so I said to myself, I said, well, hey, wait a minute. What if, as civilizations being rebuilt across the planet in my novel, they say, you know what, let's not be like the people of the past. Let's do it right this time. Let's have a little bit more empathy and compassion towards our fellow human beings. And so that was what got the ball rolling.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Definitely, if you're a sci-fi lover, if you love this stuff, it sounds like right up your alley. But it's interesting. Gregory Michael, who was one of your reviewers on Goodreads, made a comment that even though this is considered post-apocalyptic and science fiction, the vast imagination of your story exceeds those boundaries. And like, what a first of all, and awesome statement for something to read. And would you agree with him? Like, do you feel like this genre is actually potentially going to expand into others as the continuing of them trying to rebuild and all of the conflicts that they face? Is that something that you see maybe you'll go into some other areas?
So I mean, it sounds to me like almost what you're saying is, am I hoping that my series changes the game and really just takes science fiction and storytelling to that next extra step? And if that's the case, that's exactly what I wanted to accomplish here. I had an idea that I thought was unique, original, and interesting, and I said if I could just get this out there because it's blowing me away, it'll blow other people away. But to say it goes outside the bounds of science fiction and post-apocalyptic, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, just because like the bounds for science fiction are quite large. I think what he might have meant was like there's a certain amount of political drama there, so it has like political tension, almost like you would see with say uh, I don't know, like a spy film, for example, or like I don't know why I'm thinking of House of Cards. Just sort of like after this podcast, I swear to God, I'm going to come up with a better example and being like, why couldn't I have told Shannon that? But or like Lions for Lambs, like a political like intrigue, sort of that has that element to it too. So that might be why he's saying that. But I mean,
Maybe.
yeah.
But I also think, I'm an ARC reader and I have the privilege of really connecting with a lot of different authors and stuff like and I feel sometimes authors write a book with a certain vision and then readers will interject their own humanity, their own story, their own trauma. Like they'll interject their own self into the book and see things and take it to places that maybe the author never intended, but the reader themselves kind of adds that personal element to it too. So maybe that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I do think I only say like I do agree just because I've kind of done the same thing myself in a sense. But also when you said when the reader sees what they want to see, it sometimes it reminds me of I saw something a while ago which said like somebody was reading a poem and the poet said the sky was blue, and the reader says like, oh, it's an interpretation of his mood and the sadness he was feeling in his life at that point. And then it's like the author is, no, I just meant the sky was blue. So I mean there's that element of, I mean reading and like, just like video games and watching TV or film, reading, it is a bit of a two-way interaction between the reader and the author for sure. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Absolutely. So let's hear about any favorite characters. Are there any one character that you really like or that you really bonded or connected with?
I would say if I have favorite characters, it would definitely be one of the more. There's a group of people called the Rust Raisers in my story, and there's one character which I would say is favorite just because they're very cavalier about everything and they're very wiry and just sort of almost have a little bit of a crazy side to them. So I would say, if anything, that's my favorite character in the first book. But I have another character in my second book coming up, which I think is definitely a favorite of mine if I had to choose a favorite for the whole series. But I would say the most relatable one would just simply be the main character, Shindo Dekan, because I have a lot of aspects of myself that I infused into him when I was coming up with the character.
And I would say a lot of the reviewers that have reviewed your book really seem to like Shindo. That seems to be kind of another constant through that. So I think you definitely brought that well-developed character into your world.
Thank you.
So, with this being your first book, which, congratulations, that's a huge process in and of itself and getting to that point. Was there a moment you decided to be an author? Was this kind of always with you? How did this process start?
Yes and no as a simple answer. So basically, I would say just my endeavor into creativity started, I think, in around fourth or fifth grade. Because before that, I thought I was gonna just do architecture or engineering. Although even then, I had an idea, like I did in third grade, for this like time travel story that didn't really go anywhere. But I was kind of just it was just kind of like a hobby at that point. But it was around fourth or fifth grade that I saw the Star Wars trilogy, and that was just a complete 180 from everything. I was like, architecture and engineering, screw that. I'm gonna do that. I want to create something that's just gonna blow people away and really just change the game. I might have been like that, and just sort of I had an overactive imagination. I guess just reacting to some changes in my life at the time. But that was the point, the like catalyst I remember that really just got this ball rolling. And then I actually thought I was going to do film or video games. I wasn't 100% sure at the time. And then around my second year of university, I went the video game route just because I thought it was more new and groundbreaking and mysterious. And then unfortunately, that didn't really work out. I got a little burnt out and lost my passion. Got a job in construction, got an idea for a novel, said, hey, why don't I try this? It seems like a bit of an easier medium. And then that was when I decided to write this novel and pursue this idea I had and committed to it. And so, yeah, it was around 2013 that I said I'm gonna write this novel and get it done. And I said to myself, in 2 years it'll be out and I'll be making money off of it. Well,
Been a little bit longer than 2 years.
just a little bit. I've had moments when I'm like, I thought I was taking too long and that this wasn't going to happen, and I just wasn't qualified to do this. But I just kept at it and realized I had my own process. And at a certain point, I just realized this is something that people will read and like. And I got it out there. I mean, do I still have my imposter syndrome moments? Sure, but not as much as I did like years ago.
Well, how was your writing process? Was there anything specifically you did to help you, keep track of your character developments and your world building and all of these aspects that you brought into the book? How did your writing process develop?
I tend to write things down and I try to organize concepts and ideas, but I find that sometimes it just gets out of control very easily, and whether I like it or not. And then I also sometimes I would write something down, but then like I would just kind of realize I'm kind of going in this particular direction with it anyway. I would say one of the biggest things was I realized very early on I can't pants things worth a damn. I've really got to outline my novel. The first one took a lot of time just because I hadn't really, if I would spend a lot of time writing something, but it wouldn't be something I was proud of or something that I think was really in line with my vision. And so a little later, I wrote down some like tenets that I thought would be good to follow. And I went through 5 drafts with that. But I think it's a little easier to tell you what my process was for my second novel because it was a little bit more smooth and streamlined. So it was, I outlined the whole thing. I had some documents just listing out, here's the factions of people, here's what they believe, here's what their firm core values are. I wrote it, and then my process is also I disconnect my internet when I write, and then I have some people beta reading the first draft of the second novel right now. I'll take their feedback, and then go through the second draft, and then after the second draft, that's when I send it to an editor. So, yeah, that's basically my process in a nutshell, and what it used to be, and what it's sort of like um, fallen into as I've become a lot more streamlined with it.
And so I think that a great follow up to that is advice time. What advice would you give to one of our listeners who has this idea, who has this story bubbling in their head, and they want to start writing? What advice could you give them?
Say, be careful of who you take advice from. So, unless they're an author, a literary agent, a publisher, or an editor, the advice is just people like to talk and people like to sometimes think they know more than they actually do. So, unless they're in this field and they're saying you should take the direction of this or you should take your story in the direction of that, just take it with a grain of salt. Or if they give you advice about like marketing that just they've never done it themselves and they've never had to market a book themselves. Really, just take it with a grain of salt. But uh, overall, I would say you're probably gonna have imposter syndrome very early on. I did. You're more qualified to write your story than you realize. And I would just say, just for now, write something. It doesn't have to be the best thing you can make. But if you write the bad novel, you wrote something. And that means the good novel's not too far ahead, and the great novel will be even closer than that.
Those are awesome. That's fantastic. So, where can our listeners find the Sapien Empire? Where are you selling your books at?
So I have it for ebook, paperback, and hardback on Amazon. I recently switched to Drafted Digital too to distribute the ebook and paperback. I find Drafted Digital distributes it on so many platforms that I can't remember them all, but some of them are Apple Books, Google Books, Kobo, and Nook. And I will have the audiobook available in less than a month as well.
Oh, wonderful. So it's going to be an audiobook as well. That's fantastic because I know I'm a big, like, I like my books, but when I'm traveling or in the car or something like that, I love to listen to audiobooks. So that's fantastic that you're giving that option as well.
Yeah, that definitely I would do when I tap into that market, and I know it's a lot easier to do housework or drive and listen to an audiobook at the same time. So I definitely do want to reach as wide an audience as possible.
And speaking of reaching your audience, where are your social media sites? Where can our listeners connect with you?
A good place to start is my website, www.nathanogloff.com. But if you want to get more specific, I do have a Facebook group called The Forge Work of Nathan Ogloff. I have my Instagram and TikTok at Nathan_Ogloff, Twitter at Unusual author, where the U and the A are capitalized. And I do have a Goodreads page as well. But the other social stuff is the main areas where if you want to contact me, I will be there.
And as always, if you are watching us on YouTube, you're seeing all of Nathan's social media information. And before you, if you're on Spotify, we recommend hopping over to YouTube or checking out our social media platforms where you can find all of Nathan's information. So, Nathan, thank you so much for being with us today. And when your second book comes out in the fall, we need to reconnect. We need to be part of your launch party and help promote you on the release date. So let's make a plan to have you back on in the fall.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you again for being with us, and thank you all for being with us today. Next week, we are going to be talking to indie author Deborah Fox and learning about her thriller mystery book, Secondhand Rose. But until then, read more books and go explore. Bye, everyone.